Guys, there are a couple of things that absolutely grind my gears, let's say, guys. Dirtiness, rats, mice, dirtiness. All right, terrible hygiene. All of these things are absolutely disgusting to me. So I can imagine, right? I mean, the question overall, the question here is why you wouldn't last 24 hours in the Dark Ages. Guys, I wouldn't. I'm not sure I'd last 3 hours, personally. But let's go and check it out. This is a suggestion via Patreon, guys.
Many people look at the Middle Ages through romantic eyes. They think about armored knights on lumbering steeds, beautiful damsels in pointy hats, dragons.
Who are these some people?
Chivalry and courtly love. Nothing could be further from the truth. For most people, the Middle Ages were dirty, difficult, and really quite dangerous. Let's find out now why it was unlikely that you could stay alive and prosper, and why you were likely to die quite quickly during that time.
Let's go.
Welcome to Medieval Madness.
And that's the name of the channel, guys. Medieval Madness.
Communication, or the lack of it. Let's just suppose you suddenly arrived in medieval England, that there was some sort of time slip and now you were stranded in the middle of the 14th century. The first thing you would realize is that you wouldn't understand a damn thing anybody was saying.
Oh, true.
The ordinary people spoke Middle English, the posh people spoke French, and the clergy spoke Church Latin. Speaking only modern English, you might be able to understand the odd word, but an intelligible conversation with anybody is impossible at this point.
Absolutely. Completely. That was not something that I even thought of, but yeah, absolutely. The language is so awkward. Try to read anything from that time, you'll kind of instantly realize that we spoke a different language. Close.
A woman's worth.
A woman's worth.
So now, supposing you had picked up a little bit of the language, but you were unlucky enough to be a woman, then you would know all about hardship. Because of the importance placed on biblical text, medieval women were usually regarded as morally weak, meaning they were oppressed and treated as subservient. In particular, the writings of St. Paul highlighted men's authority over women and their need to stay silent in church and under the control of their husbands. For the peasant woman, work was gendered and she was responsible for the household chores. Not only spinning, brewing, cooking, weaving, and taking care of livestock and children, but also sharing the labor of the farm and fieldwork with the men.
So basically everything with no reward. Noted.
Women were expected to marry or become a nun. It is the first option that awaited the majority of women. Marriage meant pregnancy, and that meant childbirth. There was no modern pain relief or sterile hospital setting. Complications that we now consider to be inconsequential could prove fatal for the medieval mother and child. Having money and status didn't guarantee a safe birth, and a caesarean section was only performed if the mother was dying or already dead. In 1420s Florence, for example, 1 in 5 women died during labor. Death during childbirth was so prevalent that women were urged to write out a last will and testament long before giving birth, which kind of takes the shine off what should have been a joyous event.
Right. Oh my. Oh my.
Early life, early death.
Bro, 1 in 5? Bro, never get pregnant.
Today we consider the death of a child to be rare or unexpected, but if you were born in the Middle Ages, you would be lucky to make it even past your 5th birthday, as the child mortality rate was so high, and 1/3 of children died before that age in medieval England. And the dangers would start whilst you were still in the womb. Unaware of the risks of alcohol fetal syndrome, medieval women would have been blissfully knocking back huge quantities of ale or wine, or both, throughout their pregnancies. And don't get me started on their nutrition. The death of a child is one of the most awful tragedies that anyone can imagine. In medieval Europe, the mortality rate was thought to lie somewhere between 20 to 30% dying under the age of 7, depending on the year.
But that's 1 in 3.
That's children.
30%? Say 33%? That's 1 in 3, bro. That's absolutely horrifying. How did we as a group, even make it to this time with our crazy numbers?
Dying from incidents during birth, accidents, or because of war or famine and disease. Deadly illnesses included whooping cough, measles, influenza, and stomach infections, sicknesses that can easily be treated today.
So basically, a lot of this came from just not being clean. Guys, again, my entry into this video here was explaining how I absolutely cannot imagine being in a place like this because it was so dirty. A lot of what they just said comes from being dirty, bro. A lot of it. Think about it. The food was disgusting. There was obviously, no type of standards in preparing food or maintaining the meat until it's cooked. Guys, imagine all the nastiness that they were actually putting into their body. All the stomach issues. Yeah, I can imagine.
Influenza and stomach infections, sicknesses that can easily be treated today. And the grief was the same for parents living thousands of miles away. In medieval Japan, 48% of the population died as children. 48% is practically 1 in every 2 children dying.
Right.
Who are you calling a peasant?
Everyone.
The problem with living in the Middle Ages was that 85% of the population were serfs.
And obviously, when they say the Middle Ages, are referring to specifically Europe in this context, at least.
So you would have been more likely to be part of that group than not. Tied to the Lord and his land, not only would you have to grow food to sustain yourself and your family, but you would also have to make sure that there was enough to pay the Lord his due too. You couldn't leave the land without your Lord's permission or even get married. You may as well have been a slave.
Right.
You would have been always reliant on the weather. Too much rain or not enough could be a catastrophe and cause the failure of crops, which led to malnutrition and, in the worst cases, starvation. Malnutrition meant a weakened immune system, and that led to an upturn in diseases like dysentery, typhus, and smallpox. Food, when it was available, consisted of coarse bread made with barley, oats, rye, or millet, and a thin stew known as pottage.
Bro, imagine what that... Guys, rye is the most disgusting bread that has ever been introduced to the human diet. All right? I'm sorry, but if that's all they had to eat, guys... Oh, man, I guess you get used to that nasty taste.
Bread made with barley, oats, rye, or millet, and a thin stew known as pottage. Medieval Europe was teeming with wild game like rabbit, hare, deer, and boar. But these were for the nobility to hunt, not for the lower classes, and the penalty for poaching was usually pretty harsh. Clothing wasn't the comfiest, being made from itchy wool. Houses weren't exactly palatial either. Most had just 1 room or 2 rooms with no chimney and perhaps 1 or 2 small windows. They were dark, smoky, smelly, and unsanitary because they were often shared with animals, especially in the winter when conditions outdoors were harsh. With no central heating, lighting, or running water, is it any wonder that medieval lives were so short? The average life expectancy for most men in the 140 years between 1330 and 1479 was just 24 years. Women came out better with an average of 33 years, but still not great.
Right. Oh, God.
The justice system. Medieval crime and their punishments were really different from today as well, because the church controlled just about every aspect of life, from what you wore to what you could eat and when. So no nipping out to McDonald's in your long pointy shoes on a Sunday morning for your McMuffin breakfast. If you were the victim of a crime, there were no police. You just had to scream loudly to raise a hue and a cry and hope for the best. For serious crimes, death was the punishment, and these didn't just include murder or treason. Forgery, arson, receiving stolen goods, robbery, and burglary were all punishable by hanging. In fact, stealing anything worth over 12 pence, the equivalent of about 3 weeks' wages, meant a trip to the gibbet. Early in the period, trial by ordeal was a thing. Here, the guilt or innocence of the accused was determined by subjecting the suspect to a painful and often deadly experience, such as walking over red-hot coals or plunging your hand into boiling water or oil. If you were innocent, God would perform a miracle and save you.
I'm going to go ahead and guess. No one was innocent.
Petty crimes like being in debt, gambling, playing football, or using abusive language in the street were also dealt with quite harshly, with punishments ranging from public humiliation in the stocks or pillory to branding or imprisonment. Many people died in prison because of the unsanitary conditions and lack of decent food. Most crime was linked to theft because of poverty, so there was a lot of it about.
I mean, that still happens today. A lot of crime is linked to just abject poverty.
So there was a lot of it about. War, what it isn't good for.
What it isn't good for.
The list of wars throughout the world during the 1,000-year period of the Middle Ages is insane. In total, there were over 370 wars across many empires, with the last one, the Italian War, finishing in 1504. Many were fought to see which incompetent was going to sit on the throne next as king or queen, and others were contested for what were thought to be noble reasons, such as the Crusades. But then, as it is today, it was the common people who were left to pay the ultimate price. As a serf, and because of the European feudal system, if you lived in the kingdom of one of two rich people who wanted to have a go at each other, then you would be obligated to fight. Peasants had to supply military service to their liege lord on a regular basis. Men were only sent away for short periods of time, so if you were lucky enough not to die in the first 40 days, you could return home. This was because if everyone went off to war at the same time, then there would be no one to take care of the nobles. No labor meant no crops and no money for all the wealthy people to spend on silly wars. The result was a medieval military that was for the most part disorganized, resulting in a lot of dead people. And
Right.
the noblemen didn't evade death either. Around 30% of them died in one skirmish or another. As for the commoners, no one really knows the victim numbers. They were
Probably a lot higher, guys.
thought to be so insignificant that nobody ever kept a tally.
Right.
We can only estimate the casualties from medieval wars, both soldiers and the innocent bystanders caught up in the conflict. During the First Crusade at the Siege of Jerusalem, 90,000 people died. In all, during the Crusade years from 1095 until the end of the 13th century, there were between 1 to 3 million deaths. The Hundred Years' War, fought between 1337 and 1453, produced between 2 and 3.5 million fatalities. And in Asia, the Mongol invasions and conquests that took place during the 13th and 14th centuries ended with the loss of between 30 and 40 million lives. It really wasn't a good time to be a soldier or a peasant. Poison. Let's suppose that you happen to be rich during the Middle Ages and able to afford the finer things in life. Would that have
Poison
made
is
your
the
chances of
finer
survival
thing in
better?
life?
You would definitely have eaten better than the peasants with their bread and pottage. For you, the table would be laden with meats such as veal, venison, or peacock in rich cream sauces, followed by sugar desserts and fine wine. You would eat your gourmet food from beautifully glazed plates and drink from delicately decorated cups. The problem was that the glazing was made from lead oxide. Yes, it looked lovely and it was practical for cleaning, making it very popular among those who were privileged enough to be able to afford it. But when salty or acidic food was served on glazed plates or kept in glazed pots, it caused the coating to dissolve and the lead was absorbed into the food.
Oh, so what you're saying is the people that were basically lording over other people, meaning the people that had so much that they could do all of these things while people were basically stuck eating rye soup. Guys, these people were unfortunately, offing themselves with their fanciness and salted meat products. I don't really truthfully feel bad for them. I don't respect the concept of nobility in the first place, but let's continue.
Lead is a poisonous heavy metal which collects in the human body over time. Acute poisoning can attack the nervous system and cause headaches, abdominal pain, and infertility. Chronic poisoning may lead to seizures, coma, and death. Because children are still growing, the effects on them can be devastating and affect their ability to learn. Medieval skeletons from cemeteries in more affluent urban areas of Germany and Denmark have shown that people had lead levels well above normal. Lead was also present in stained glass windows, coins, and on roof tiles. Rainwater was often collected from roofs for drinking, and this could have been another source of the poisoning. Bread was the main food staple for the medievals. Often the rye used to make bread would become infected with a fungus called Claviceps purpurea. This caused an infection in humans which was called St. Anthony's fire. There were many outbreaks throughout the Middle Ages which caused tens of thousands of people to die and millions more to become sick. What we now know as ergot poisoning caused hallucinations, muscle cramps, nausea, insomnia, and sores. In extreme cases, when left untreated, the blood flow to an infected person's hands and feet is restricted, causing burning pains. Gangrene can set in and fingers, toes, hands, and feet can turn black and drop off. Some
Gangrene.
historians believe it is ergot poisoning that is responsible for some of the dancing epidemics that occurred between the 14th and 17th centuries. These epidemics involved groups of people, sometimes thousands at a time, dancing erratically in the streets until they collapsed from exhaustion and/or injury. Thank you for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please subscribe if you enjoy these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Have a great week. Cheers.
Hey, this was a very well put together video. I encountered nothing that sounded odd in terms of like the history of it, at least, guys. I mean, this was a really great put together video. I honestly, initially, only cared about the dirtiness, but apparently there's a couple more things that I probably should have, cared about also. But again, luckily, we're here. Okay, we're in a time where we don't have our farm animals living in the house with us, guys, right? We're not passing that nastiness from us to the animal and then that animal to us, right? We don't have to smell that. I can imagine. I couldn't imagine. Just, guys, I'm just glad we're here. I'm glad you're here, and we're safe and we're happy. Okay? In comparison, basically. All right? But all right, listen, you guys all have an absolutely amazing day and enjoy your day thoroughly.